Hello and welcome everybody to the National LGBT Bar's second podcast. My name is Drew Levasseur and I'm the Deputy Program Officer with the LGBT Bar, and I lead our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program, Lavender Law 365. I'm so excited to be here with you all today with our special guests and one of our colleagues, Taylor. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, and we'll start with Jeena, please.
Thank you, Drew. Hi, everyone. My name is Jeena Cho. I am the co-author of The Anxious Lawyer, an 8-week guide to a more joyful and satisfying law practice through mindfulness and meditation. And I became curious about the topic of mindfulness and meditation because I was struggling with an anxiety disorder. In addition to teaching mindfulness and meditation to lawyers and at bar associations, I also practice bankruptcy law with my husband.
Excellent. Samantha?
Hi, I'm Samantha Tenner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Colorado, and I'm working on my license in marriage and family therapy, as well as my sex therapy certification. And I'm a 2L, and I work mostly with trans individuals.
Excellent. Taylor?
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Carter-DiSanto, and I am a recent graduate of the Syracuse University College of Law, as well as Syracuse Maxwell, which is for my MPA. I have been working with the LGBT Bar as a summer intern last summer, and then I was the co-chair for the Law Student Congress over the course of this past year. And I also have worked with the bar a little bit this summer as well. And I'm very, very excited to hear about these issues because they're things I often struggle with as a law student. So I'm excited to hear what everybody has to say.
Thank you. And so I think we're going to start with Jeena kind of framing up what we're going to talk about with mindfulness and leading us in an exercise. Thank you, Jeena.
Okay, so when we talk about mindfulness, I think it can be like, it can feel sort of lofty or esoteric in some way. So when we talk about mindfulness, what we're really talking about is the practice of inviting yourself to the present moment. And I'd like to add to that, inviting yourself to the present moment with compassion. So compassion towards yourself, compassion towards those around you. And I know that's one of the things that I certainly struggled with, is being kind to myself. And especially now, I feel like a little bit of self-compassion is really needed. And so I want to just invite everyone to a short grounding exercise, and it'll take about 5 minutes to do this. And so let's start by just checking the posture, because we're often sitting all day and we don't really think about how we're sitting. So let's start by placing both feet firmly on the ground and feeling your hips and the back of your legs sink into the chair below you, that point of contact, and then coming up the spine, noticing the shape and the posture of your spine. And if it feels good, you might flex and move your spine just a little bit to find a comfortable seated position. Then coming up to the shoulders, and it might feel nice to roll the shoulders back and actually open up the chest area, because we're often sitting all day. And when you're feeling like you found the posture that is comfortable, or at least good enough, allow your eyes to soften. And when you close the eyes, it's a very different experience than having the eyes open. And so just taking a moment to notice whatever it is you're able to observe with the eyes closed. And so you might notice sounds that you didn't notice before. You might also notice different thoughts or physical sensations. And when you notice these things, see if you can allow the experience to be exactly what it is without needing to change it or have it be different in any way. And beginning to notice that the body is breathing. So, of course, this is an activity that you do all day long. So, not changing how you're breathing in any way, but simply bringing your attention to the breath, breathing in, breathing out. Inviting the thinking mind to rest by simply noticing and observing the breath as you breathe in and out. It's natural for the mind to do what the mind does and may engage in thinking or worrying or daydreaming or making the to-do list. And when you notice this, very gently, with a sense of friendliness, return back to the breath, breathing in and breathing out. And let's take one deep breath and breathing in, sending the breath all the way down into your belly, breathing out. And let's close the practice by beginning to wiggle the fingers and toes, moving your body in any way that feels good to you. And when you feel ready, allow the eyes to open.
Thank you so much. I feel so much better. So let's start off talking about mental health for law students. We know that attorneys suffer from depression at significantly higher rates than 10% of the general population affected. And the high stress environments from law school lead to these feelings of depression and or suicidality. It exists in law school settings as well. What are some pieces of advice that you all might have, Jeena and Samantha, for law students who might be battling these feelings?
So I graduated from law school a while ago. And I remember when I was in law school, the first day of law school, the dean, we're all sitting there in the classroom, and the dean said, look to your right and look to your left, because one of you won't be here at the end of the year. I don't know if they still do that, but I feel like, in law school, there is this element of a hazing ritual where I think they make it more difficult than it needs to be. And also there's this sort of general acknowledgement that stress and anxiety is very prevalent in our profession, but no one teaches you any tools for how to manage the stress and anxiety of being a lawyer. And as I mentioned, I do consumer bankruptcy law, and one of the things that they definitely didn't teach me in law school is that as lawyers, we are in the human suffering business. Needless to say, no one ever comes to see me with happy news, and just being immersed in human suffering has an impact on you. And I wish that's something they taught me in law school, that observing the suffering of others impacts you, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and so forth. And so for me, just having a lot of tools in my toolbox to recognize when I'm running on fumes, when I'm needing a break, and not missing those cues along the way has been really, really critical. So for me, I noticed that once my stress level starts to go up, the very, very first thing that I notice is my stomach hurts. Like Sunday afternoon, my stomach just kind of cramps up and I just don't feel good. And before I would sort of ignore it and I would sort of try to power through it. But now I recognize that as my body's way of saying, hey, it's like waving a flag, right? This is something to pay attention to, and not feeling apologetic about saying I really need to give myself a little bit of a break. And I do that by regularly doing the activities that I do on a daily basis with a little bit of mindfulness. So for example, showering in the morning. So I jokingly tell people that I started practicing mindfulness and meditation because I got tired of showering with all of my clients, not literally, of course, but showering is a wonderful opportunity to kind of unplug rest and restore, right? You can feel the sensation of the warm water and enjoy all of these luxurious body products that you bathe yourself with. And whenever you notice your mind thinking about, I don't know, rules against perpetuity, you can go, oh, my mind is doing that mind thing, and come back to the moment and go, oh, I'm in the shower. Let me enjoy the warm water, right? It could also be a moment of gratitude, because we know that practicing gratitude is like an antidote to some of these, feelings that may arise. And also like eating, right? So many of us sort of eat with a screen in front of us. And, when you do that, you're sort of feeding your mind with stress as you're feeding your body. So actually like taking these little moments throughout the day to relax, restore, and reset. We know that from research that it's not so much like the impact of any single stressful event that is harmful to you long term, it's the compounding effect, right? It's that when stress continues to build on top of each other. So those would be my suggestions, not only for law students, but for lawyers as well.
Excellent. Samantha, what do you think?
Yeah, that vicarious trauma is definitely extremely real. I believe it's also a lot about finding, of course, self-care, what that means, but it's also about having those strong boundaries between who you are as a student and then who you are as a person. So being able to compartmentalize these identities and find that balance in your life. Maybe self-care is spending time with friends, making those plans, finding compassion for yourself, giving yourself long breaks, forcing yourself to step away from the work you're doing. I would say it's imperative to carve out that time. And I know as law students that everyone has some sort of organizational mechanism. So to actually write it down or find your own way to stay committed where you can hold yourself accountable to something.
Love that. Taylor, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of them, so I'll start with you, Samantha. Do you have any suggestions on daily practices that law students can implement to increase their well-being and create a sense of inner resilience?
Yeah, so in the end, it's always really about that particular individual, what makes them feel powerful and what calms their mind. Some simple daily practices can be body scans. So scanning your body from head to toe, feeling in your body and asking, what do I need? How do I get it? Then act and get it. So an example would be doing a body scan and feeling like I'm really groggy right now and I can't concentrate on anything. What do I need? Maybe I need a nap. How do I get it? Well, I do have some time in between this class and that class. Okay, then do it and hold yourself accountable to it. Other things are journaling, daily acts of gratitude, daily walks, and I encourage a lot of self-talk, refuting irrational thinking patterns that you're having concerning school. So when you notice, and everyone, I feel positive that everyone has done this, when you go into that catastrophic thinking pattern, I'm going to fail. How can you challenge that with realistic refutes? And then just be repetitive about it with yourself.
Great, thank you, Sam. That's wonderful. Jeena?
Yeah, I love what Samantha said about actually asking yourself what your needs are. And, I actually had to start to do this when I was experiencing just overwhelming anxiety. And even that question, like when I was working with my therapist, she would be like, what are your needs? And I would go, oh, I can't ask myself that question because then I'm being selfish. Like I would just have this overwhelming sense of guilt. So that was sort of the first piece I actually had to work through. And seeing like what's underneath that. And for me, what was underneath that is sort of a lot of cultural conditioning. Like if I take any time for myself, then I'm being selfish, and being selfish is like the worst sin I can ever commit. So kind of unlearning a lot of those behaviors. And also like, Samantha said, like really getting to know your inner chatter. I realized that I had these two constant companions in my life. one was anxiety and one was this feeling of like not enough, like all the different variations of not enough, and not being good enough, not being smart enough. You know, I only went to a state school, so when I'm battling someone who went to an Ivy, you know, like all of these completely irrational thoughts. And also just realizing that we are hardwired to have a negativity bias. So, you know, when I'm going in to argue a hearing, I'm literally imagining 101 things that could go wrong, but I rarely, I should say, imagine the scenario where I walk in and I make my appearance and the judge says, you know, counsel, I read both of your moving parties and Ms. Cho, your motion's been granted, and I walk out, right? Like we never imagine that scenario. And also, you know, I think our minds have this incredible ability to sort of induce both stress and anxiety in the body. And so kind of recognizing like, oh, you know, my mind is doing it, what it loves to do is to imagine all the worst case scenario, and just asking yourself like, what's the best case scenario? What are all the in-between scenarios? Because, you know, I found that the way that I talk to myself is so directly linked to, you know, that sense of like worthlessness, that sense of, you know, I don't belong here, right? All of those talks are not based in reality when I take a step back. And so kind of challenging your thoughts, you know, like literally put your thoughts on the witness stand and cross-examine it. Like, so, you know, just kind of starting to recognize these thought patterns and starting to work with it.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Because I have to say, from my personal experience in law school, I'm very much conditioned to think of, you know, what is the worst case scenario and how do I deal with it? Never in the reverse. So that's extremely helpful advice. Thank you for that. And as we just discussed, you know, being a law student in general can really take a toll on your mental health and wellness. LGBTQ plus law students face many additional hardships because of this identity. Samantha, I'm going to start with you. What are some of the specific issues that LGBTQ plus law students may face?
Yeah, so there's just I have a few things to bring some attention to here. So in terms of specific issues, I would say that coming out in any setting is taxing on the individual for any identity. Something that I do want to bring attention to is that a lot of individuals, and in particular trans individuals, don't have like this luxury of coming out to people, since many of them don't even consider themselves as passing. So coming out or identifying as part of the LGBTQ plus community for some people can be just walking into a room if they so decide or choose to express themselves as so. And often it takes a lot of time and work on the individual's part to express themselves as so. So then this is just another added stressor for someone when someone is in a law school setting, especially if they don't feel that the space is safe for their identity. For me, being cis female, identifying as queer, expression being predominantly feminine, it's a privilege whether to disclose or come out as queer. So I just like to make note of that added stressor. And this just makes it even more imperative to create a safer space for LGBTQ plus people and help our fellow law students and professors understand how to cultivate these safer spaces. I go to a law school in a conservative state, and I've seen many microaggressions towards the LGBTQ plus community from staff and other law students. One in particular was a professor who would cold call students by their last names and would begin by saying Ms. or Mr. before calling on each person, as if cold calling wasn't stressful enough. So in doing this, they're assuming one's gender and also suggesting that gender is binary. So with this law school atmosphere tending to operate on a predominantly traditional system, it's important to be able to identify these microaggressions and speak up so that more law school forums can learn and grow.
And thank you so much, Samantha. And then Jeena, how do you suggest that students cope with these things, LGBTQ plus law students in particular, and then allies as well?
Yeah, you know, I think one of the difficult part of being a lawyer is that there's almost a stereotype of what a lawyer should look like. You know, that they're white, male. And I remember as a very, very young baby lawyer, I had a great, you know, I mean, he was a perfectly great mentor. He was very caring, but he would say to me, like, Jeena, you can't be so passive. You have to raise your voice and you have to you know, I mean, he just said you have to stand up tall, and it was basically like you have to be more like me. And as you can see, I'm like 5'5", Asian, you know, 125 pounds, soaking wet. And that way of being in the courtroom was just an awful look on me. Like me raising my voice when the opposing counsel is raising his voice is not a good look. And so it really took me a long time to figure out, like, what does my authentic self as a lawyer look like, especially where there isn't a model for what that looks like. And I feel like when you're sort of, you know, outside of that, right, that like box, it's hard because there's lack of mentorship, there's a lack of even knowing, you know, what that can look like. And so it took me a really long time, you know, to sort of figure out, and, you know, and also just to feel comfortable in my own skin and say, like, you know, I don't need to raise my voice. That's not who I am. And in fact, that when I actually soften my voice, that gets people a little bit calmer and they tend to listen to me a little bit more. And, you know, and I'm not like, I can't like out aggression my opposing counsel most of the time. You know, that's not who I want to be. And also just, you know, thinking about like, you know, and I don't want to be the biggest jerk in the room. So kind of really thinking about what does your authentic lawyering style look like? And, you know, I think that's not something that happens overnight. And also, you know, to the extent possible, like looking around and seeing, you know, who are the models out there that I admire, and, you know, how do I want to show up as a lawyer?
Great, thank you so much. So Drew, transgender and non-binary law students.
I have one quick thing. Just
yeah, of course, Samantha, jump in. Yeah.
As well. So in terms of students that are coping with microaggressions or anything really in the law school setting, my kind of take is just to sit with that and talk with someone and increase your use of support systems and find a community within your community that identifies with those struggles and begin processing it with those individuals. So maybe bring it up for discussion with your LGBTQ plus student organization at the law school, but do not put it aside as something that you always have to deal with. It's not your job to fix. And sometimes we have to sit with the reality that some things may not be fixed right away. So how does that make you feel? What does that bring up about your identity in law school? And just continuing to have these discussions with yourself and confide in someone.
Great, thank you so much. And again, feel free to jump in, because this advice is like, I'm personally am thankful as a law student. I know so many people listening will be very thankful for all of this advice. So as I was mentioning before, within the LGBTQ plus community, transgender and non-binary law students often face very, very different struggles from their cisgender counterparts. And for example, there's bullying, harassment, being misgendered, fighting insurance discrimination. All of this can occur while trying to exceed in an already challenging situation, law school. What are some specific tips, Drew, that you may have for law students who face these added struggles?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I will share that I transitioned during law school over 15 years ago, and I was the only trans person in my law school. And even today, I hear from a lot of folks they're the only trans or non-binary student, and as Samantha said, it's like it does feel very isolating. Our profession on the whole is so far behind on diversity across the board. It's shameful, and that's why I'm so excited to be at the National LGBT Bar doing Lavender Law 365 to do something about that. So number one, I am available to come to your law school to try to get people in shape, to do trainings and to bring people along, because I think that the number one thing people need to do besides change their policies is to actually have training so that there is a shift in the culture. And that does take time, it takes an investment, and it needs to happen in our profession. Second thing I'll say is that about 10 years ago, I testified before the ABA about some of the things that I endured during law school, including physical violence from my classmates when I was visibly gender nonconforming, and I was walking to class and a carload of people in my school, sped up, as a joke. And these are people who are going to be lawyers. So if you're thinking about like bullying and harassment, and we talk about what happens to our clients, it's also happening within our own profession. So being the director of the Trans Rights Project at Lambda for 10 years, I not only had my own experiences as an openly trans attorney, but was a beacon for a lot of folks who were living openly as trans or non-binary, or people who are stealth, who are not out, and heard a lot of stories. So I like to share a lot of these things as a reality check, even right now, while we're seeing more and more trans and non-binary people coming out in our profession. Our law firms, our retention rate is very sad. And so I'm glad that there's a national trans bar. There's a lot going on. And I want to say to anybody who's on this call who is not trans or non-binary, we need you as allies. That is the number one thing. Like what Samantha said about finding somebody else. When those things are happening, like I remember I just kind of swallowed it because I had enough to do with the law school, and how was I going to get through this if I was going to deal with all of these things that were happening to me every day, everywhere I went. We need support. I found support, and the only way that I had a career and became who I became was because I found people who were straight who said to me, I don't really know anything about this, but we're going to get through this together. And so everybody who is listening to this can have a role in changing the profession just by listening, being supportive, sitting with the person, finding resources, standing up and doing something about it, complaining about things. And so it's not just that trans and non-binary people are alone, it's that we're all in this together, and we are literally shaping the profession right now.
Thank you so much, Drew. And I actually have like a really quick follow-up to that. What would be your tips for, I find as a very loud activist in my law school throughout the time that I was there, that I get a lot of pushback from administration regarding, we don't have this problem here, or perhaps we don't have any trans students here, which I don't know how they could know that because they don't allow people to self-identify with those things. But how do you deal with this pushback with it? If I don't see it, it doesn't exist.
Yes, thank you for naming that. That is so prevalent, and I heard that just this past month from a law firm saying we don't have anybody, and I actually said yes, you do, because I know the people who work here. So first of all, I think you named one of the practical things that we need to do is really self-ID, the option of counting people, demographic information, including race and including sexual orientation, gender identity, is so deeply important so that we can actually show this is who we have. We also know that our profession has a legal closet problem where there's a lot of LGBT folks who are in law school and suddenly less in the profession. That is a cultural shift where people don't feel safe to be their authentic selves, as Jeena said, in their everyday workplace. And that is just bad because it's bad for our health. It's bad for our business. We're better producers and we make more money, which is what the U.S. mostly cares about. In terms of diversity, so it's better for everybody all around. So yeah, I hope that answered the question. I might have gone off track there.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Drew. And now I kind of direct this question or discussion point to everybody on the call. I personally have experienced this, and I know several of my colleagues have experienced it as well, especially at extremely conservative law schools. There will often be student organizations that will bring on campus individuals to speak, and these individuals have, broadcasted their anti-LGBTQ+ beliefs, views, and not only that, they may be there to speak on those views, and this can be a little tolling on, the LGBTQ+ community at law school when you're already stressed out and you're walking down the hall and you see a big old poster or somebody who's once said that they hate you and everything that you are coming and being promoted by your law school. I know personally this brings up feelings of hurt and unacceptance by my colleagues who may not even know that they are making me feel this way. So what are some ways that, law students can kind of deal with this, both within oneself, and then how do you then, what actions could you take? So we'll start with dealing with the feelings within oneself. Jeena, do you have any tips?
Yeah, and I don't know that there's, a one size fits all way to deal with it. Like, I think it's fine maybe for one speaker, you organize and you protest and, whatever those tools may be available to you, but then the next speaker, you're like, I'm gonna just sit at home and watch Netflix and eat ice cream because that's what I need, right? So kind of tuning into what your needs are in that moment and respecting that.
Thank you. Sam?
Mine is kind of answering both those questions in one, but again, I stress it, find your social support. Don't keep these feelings and process it. It's painful to have feelings of hurt and unacceptance, and it's okay to show that this is hurting you. So find someone that you can talk to about that.
Drew, do you have any suggestions as far as like, things we can do when events like this happen?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you included this question, Taylor, because I feel like we're just getting to the place where we're really acknowledging that this is wrong. Because I mean, it's like this is still happening. We're hearing from law students, and well, so first of all, the National LGBT Bar would like to hear from you if this is happening at your law school, because we have resources on how to deal with it and how to talk to the administration and deans and to explain why this is not okay. And I will just say flat out, our rights, LGBT people's rights, are not in our existence, especially as trans and non-binary people. It's not up for debate, period.
Right.
So that's, we're happy to be the people who talk to folks and say why this is problematic. Because sometimes it's, we're in this environment. I remember sitting through some classes where I could not believe some of the things that were being talked about that were, related to deeply personal identities, not just LGBT folks, but about race. Like there were so many horrendous things that I'm sure that we've all witnessed in law school, and you shouldn't have to sit through that. Your feelings are valid. And there's something to do about that. So I will just, one thing I heard this past month right before the Title VII SCOTUS case came down, I had a firm actually say we'd like to have a debate, arguing both sides. And I actually had to say, like, even in firms, it's not just in law schools, there's this idea that because we're lawyers, there's, take all the emotion out of it, it's all up for debate. So I think bringing in that sensitivity and that, like, no, we're not going to harm our coworkers and our students by discussing, this is not up for debate. Period.
Yeah. Yes. Period.
We got your back. Kind of, going off of this, right now, some would say we're in the midst of a social revolution. But I think we can all at least agree that the need for activism is extremely high. How do students and, even those who are already lawyers balance this call to activism, this call to be an advocate for those who may not be able to advocate on behalf of themselves? How do you balance this call with the need for self-care? Because sometimes I feel like as a law student throughout the course, there would be things that would happen in my school. And it was time after time after time, I felt like I was going to the dean. I was talking to this person, me. And I started to feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm drowning underneath this pressure. But it was much bigger than me. So then I was like, okay, I have to keep going. And eventually I found myself like drowning and just not my peak self. How do you suggest we balance that? Sam, if you want to start.
Yeah, so here is where I would say your body is telling you everything you need to know. So you're saying, I'm drowning. What does that feel in your body? You need to check in and read your body. Know when you're feeling overwhelmed, and keeping in touch with that by noticing the clues that your body is giving you, knowing when you need to step away. And like allowing yourself to step away, giving yourself permission giving, that you don't need to be gung-ho on every single thing, that maybe you can choose your lane and stick with it and come back to it. And it's really, really about noticing when you really need to step away. And it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things that's like a constant, it's the repeating and talking to yourself and noticing.
Definitely. Jeena, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I come back to that saying of secure your own oxygen mask before helping others. Like if you're running on fumes, if you're running on empty, you're not going to be helpful to anyone else. The practice that I tend to do a lot, especially when I'm just feeling sort of worn out, there's a a meditation called loving kindness meditation, and it's this beautiful practice, and there's just so much research coming out about all of its helpful benefits. And you can easily find, if you just Google like loving kindness meditation, or I can also include it in the resources, but it's where you repeat like loving phrases to yourself. So phrases like, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be at ease, may I be free from suffering. And I find that to be like a resting space. And so, I think having a practice like that, it could be going on long walks, or just having some sort of a restorative practice where you can kind of restore, your nervous system and get out of that fight or flight reaction. It's really helpful.
Great, thank you. Drew, did you want to take the next question?
Yes, thank you. So with that backdrop, we know for a fact that Black LGBTQ plus people and LGBTQ plus people of color who face multiple marginalized identities are carrying a heavier burden in our society. I think a lot of folks are waking up to systemic racism, which is fantastic, but these struggles have always been present. And it's been great to see more conversation. And so we're looking at the systemic advantages experienced by LGBTQ plus people who are white, cisgender, upper class, able-bodied. We see the difference here of like acknowledging privilege. So we know that there are particular people within our communities who are facing, very deep feelings of exclusion, exhaustion, and so much more, carrying a heavier burden than other folks. And I've talked to a lot of attorneys and law students who are feeling like they still need to get, in the rat race and pretend that none of that is happening. So I guess I just kind of want to open that up to how do we, we're having this great conversation, we're giving these great tips and tools, but how can we like deeply support folks who are carrying a heavier burden than other folks, even within the LGBTQ plus communities?
My thoughts are not how we can support them, but more even a message to those people that are feeling this burden to be gentle with yourself. And of course, first and foremost, and continue to tease through these identities and these feelings that are coming up. Sometimes it helps having a therapist to do this, of course, but it's important to understand ourselves and how our intersectional identities are intertwined. And it's okay to be confused and exhausted, because it is exhausting and confusing understanding who we are, sifting through what messages we received growing up about these identities were and how they affect us today. It truly is a lifelong journey, and as I'm always continuously doing, and some people need to be reminded of that. So be gentle with yourself. You are already doing great work by identifying these identities and thinking about how they all relate to one another. So, yeah.
And I'd like to add, as far as offering support to these groups and these individuals who are carrying this super heavy burden, be a voice for them. Take a little bit of that burden onto yourself. For example, often, Drew, you mentioned constantly in classes, we're talking about cases that are debating the very identity of a person who's sitting in that class. Don't make them be the one to raise their hand and point that out. If you feel comfortable, raise your hand and speak up for them, so they don't have to be, because I can promise you that, when a case that comes up that has to do with race, everybody's turning and looking at the Black and brown people in the room. Everybody's turning to them to, oh, what do you think about this? It's exhausting. So my suggestion would be to take some of that burden onto yourself if you do not share those identities, because there's so many other things that are going on in these individuals' lives that, like, taking just a little bit, even just, adding something to the conversation, it just can be such a relief. Like, I can speak from personal experience that several of my colleagues have stepped up when I just couldn't anymore. And I will be forever grateful for them. So that would be one of my suggestions.
Yeah, I think if you're in a position of privilege, just kind of looking around the room and saying, like, whose voices are not present, and what can I do to include those voices? I tend to speak at a lot of different bar association organizations, and I am still just shocked at just how, like, overwhelmingly white and male the speakers tend to be. And I've just made it a point of saying, you know, who else is presenting? And I'm, you know, and just like inviting that conversation and saying like, I know as a bar association, you value diversity and inclusion, and I just want to make sure that the panels are reflective of the people that's sitting in the audience. And I just, you know, I feel like that's one area in which, you know, as people that have privilege, that's like one sort of, you know, fairly easy step. And I think it can feel uncomfortable to do it at first, but just sort of even having, you know, and I'm seeing more men, and I wish I would see more of them, just basically refuse to speak, and they just have this policy of I don't speak on panels, like I do not speak on panels where it's just all white males. And I think if we just did more of that, we wouldn't have them anymore. And yeah, so, and I think that's just like one tiny little segment where we can start to have those conversations. But, you know, I think also educating yourself and then like sharing what you know with your family and friends, right? Because we can't rely on Black and brown people to do all the work. And it's like, you know, like learn and teach what you know. And also, you know, it may just be received better when it's coming from you know, because there's going to be that level of trust and that sense of, you know, a sense of support and trust that they have with you.
I love that. And I feel like this sense of like awareness that a lot of people are starting to evaluate how they're complicit in white supremacy. And our profession, we have so much power. Even if we're law students, we're already in the track where we could be bringing people along. And I love all these examples of things that we individually have responsibility around, particularly because we were in the legal profession. It's not just about we're needed to represent folks, but there's so many opportunities. We're swimming in 90% white profession. And there's so many pieces of that we can all do that we need to be doing to make a difference every day.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, kind of building off of this, you know, LGBTQ plus Black and brown students right now are tackling law school while the Black Lives Matter movement is in full force. And, you know, this can often bring up feelings of guilt when you just feel like you maybe need a break, because every single time you turn on the TV, you're seeing somebody who looks like your brother, your sister, your uncle, your aunt being murdered in cold blood, and people are just recording it. And you're confronted with these things daily. So you feel like because you're confronted with it, you need to do something, but at the same time, you are beginning to feel exhausted and drained and hurt, anxious. All the emotions, you feel them all. And so I guess, again, going back to this balance question, but specifically, I'd like to talk about these feelings of guilt that you may have for taking care of yourself when there's so many horrible things going on in the world to people in your community and people that you love. And it's a lot. So how do you really deal with that?
Yeah, I can say, and Jeena already kind of mentioned it, but you really having to take care of yourself in order to show up stronger for your fellow LGBTQ plus Black and brown folks. I mean, it's you really have to take a step back and be like, in order to show up stronger, I have to do this for myself. And I'm noticing also, and I've talked to numerous people about this kind of shaming culture that's happening with people that aren't showing up as much as to someone's standards. And you know, to that, I think people need to just hear it's okay. It's okay to step back. It's okay to take care of yourself. I mean, everyone right now is going through something. It's the pandemic, it's the movement, and we really need to take care of ourselves in order to be better advocates. And that's just plain and simple. So continuing to remind yourself that, I mean, a lot of people need to just really hear it over and over to kind of let it sink in. So yeah.
Yeah, I like this question of just asking myself, you know, how can I be kind to myself? And I think that's like a great check-in question, especially when you're just feeling like not quite like yourself and you're just feeling a little bit tired. Just asking yourself, like, how can I be kind to myself? And when I first started the practice, I remember having this fear, like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to turn into a completely lazy person and I'm just going to eat like gallons of ice cream and watch like endless amount of TV. But often it was like, oh, I've been working for 8 hours and I need a bathroom break. I need a glass of water. I need to just sit and look out, you know, at the clouds or whatever those practices may be. And even like treating the parts of yourself that is trying so hard, that like perfectionist tendencies, like to embrace all of those little bits of yourself, the parts of you that feel shame when you're taking a break, or guilty. And like kind of, I'd like to sort of think about these like little orphan children, like all the different little parts of myself, and be like, all right, come on, like we can all do this together. Like get in the car and we'll just all, get through this together. So yeah.
I love that. I hear from so many people who are LGBT, people of color, especially, are just feeling like, especially I'm a law student or I'm a lawyer, I have to do everything. And, and the reality is, due to structural racism and inequality, that you do have to work 3 times or 4 times as hard. So having all that in mind, hearing this from like Samantha and Jeena, hearing that it's okay to have boundaries, and in fact, if you want to do this work, if you want to be an attorney, we need you alive and thriving. So it's imperative for you to be prioritizing yourself, like with the mask, as Jeena said, if you want to do what you got into in the first place. And for me, that was something that was really, really difficult. And I don't feel like I heard enough over the years I was practicing, like what I'm hearing from Jeena and Samantha, that it actually is imperative that you take care of yourself. And this is what that looks like. I love this. So Taylor, I'm going to just ask one more question if I can before we move on. So I just want to name that we've talked a lot about what's going on, where people are in crisis right now, and there's so much going on. And we also know, speaking of, the things that we need to address, that we've had, I think, up to 21 murders, mostly of Black transgender women this year, which is almost a total of what was last year. So there's this unbelievable epidemic happening of murders of people within our community who are on the front lines of the most marginalized identities, being a woman, being Black, being transgender. And so I know that we're trying to center those who are most marginalized in our work, but I want to ask what people have reflections on this, but I also want to say that one of the things that I've been doing about that for me is to use my position, my connections in the legal field and so on, to try to reach out to Black attorneys and law students, particularly LGBT folks, and say, how can I help your career? What can I do? What do you need? So that's just one, like an easy thing that we could all be doing, of taking that time, making your pie chart of what you do with your day, is to make a difference in the pipeline and the difference in the life, because we need particularly Black trans women leading the LGBT movement. So I would love to hear anyone else's reflections on this horrors that we're seeing all around us.
So I'll just add that, as I've been seeing this thing on social media, which I actually really, really enjoy, is that I've been seeing a lot of, Instagram famous people allowing Black trans individuals to, take over their Instagram. And what this does is it allows these individuals to have a platform that, due to structural racism and inequality, they would never have otherwise. And people, who love the famous Instagram person so much, they tune in and they look and they say, oh, wow, if they like them, then, maybe I should listen. Maybe I should hear what they have to say. And if they don't, then that's okay, because we didn't want those followers anyways. But I think that you can kind of transfer that into real life, and being, kind of like I said, the voice for somebody who perhaps cannot be in that room. So the fact that we do not have representation of Black trans women in the legal profession just means that it is so much more important to bring that perspective to every single table. So again, it's not just because you don't see it doesn't mean the problems don't exist. And so you have to take these, don't be afraid to be the only person in the room who is angry about something, because the angry Black woman narrative has been around for years, and I embrace it with every part of my being, because you're right, I am angry and I have every single right to be angry. So I think that if more of our allies, were angry too, or brought the situation up, then we wouldn't feel so excluded. And again, and Black trans women, this is a serious problem, and it breaks my heart hearing these numbers. But what we can do in the legal profession is just make sure that we bring these voices to the table and make sure that they're heard. And if they're not there, then we do it for them, because there's no better time than now, because things are just, it's scary. It's scary. It's a scary, scary time.
Yeah, Taylor, you couldn't have said it honestly better. I mean, I was just going to say similar things, and just using our privileges in whatever possible way we can. I know that's kind of like the buzzword going around, using your privilege, but seriously, just doing it, committing to doing it. I've been trying to commit to doing one thing every day, whether it's a small, like it's a donation, or amplifying a Black or brown voice, or having hard discussions about it with someone who you don't really want to have this discussion with, just pushing yourself each day to do something. Yeah.
And also I think just kind of even being aware of whose voices you tend to listen to. And Taylor, I love that idea of having people allowing other people to take over their Instagram feed, because I kind of went through this a couple of years ago where I was doing some like serious self-reflection, and I was sort of looking at the last 10 books that I read, the people that I follow on Twitter and Facebook, and I was like, wow, like so white, and it's like I had to really make it a conscious effort. Because I think if you sort of go with mainstream, it's so easy to sort of fall into that trap and that habit.
Definitely. So we've been talking about a lot of things that are going on right now, but I think it would be completely wrong to ignore another major thing that's going on right now, which is COVID-19, and we are in the midst of a global pandemic. Obviously, we cannot ignore this. This is in front of us every day. People are dying every day. So again, law students, as if law school isn't hard enough, we're experiencing a global pandemic, and bringing on a bunch of other issues. It's exposing, systemic racism in a way that it's never been exposed before, or inequalities as far as classism and so many other things. This is, bringing up a bunch of feelings and emotions. And what are some ways that law students, as we mentioned, it's a very stressful time. And normally you may be going out with friends to deal with it, or, going to the movies, or taking a spa day, whatever it may be. A lot of these things can't happen right now because we are in a global pandemic. So what are some tips you may have for coping with law school stress when you're quarantined or otherwise sheltering in place?
The first thing that comes to mind is just acknowledging it and naming it. I think so often when we experience difficult emotions or unpleasant emotions, the first thing we tend to do is kind of ignore it and suppress it. And just to say, like, this is a hard time that I'm going through, going through law school, or even for, recent graduates. Like, I can't imagine taking the bar right now. Just, there's just so much that's happening. And, we've kind of said this over and over and over again, but, just taking like little tiny baby steps to take really good care of yourself, and also, connecting with people. Just because we're social isolating doesn't mean that you have to be alone. Reaching out and, going on walks, or practicing social distancing, but also still connecting with people.
Great. Thank you, Jeena. Drew?
Yeah, thank you. So, Samantha, first of all, thank you for what you said about supporting trans and non-binary people. And it just makes such a difference to have allies out there. And so I wanted to just point out that the US Trans Survey, we know, which was 2015 data, but who knows where we're at now, says it's 40% attempt suicide rate for the trans population. And if we combine that with the numbers we heard earlier for people who are in the legal profession, we know that there's some serious risk, particularly for this very marginalized population. We also heard from a lot of folks with COVID-19 that, like surgeries have been put off and seen as non-essential. There's just so many trans folks who are in crisis, and I'm sure you're helping a lot of folks. So I just wanted to see if you wanted to give any advice, particularly for law students who are trans and non-binary, but also maybe to people who can reach out and be supportive to those folks who are facing these numbers.
Yeah, so the first and foremost and biggest thing is safety first. So physical safety, are you safe? Do you need to make arrangements to be safe? What can those arrangements look like during the pandemic? Social support system, who can you go to? Is there anyone in your life? If not, maybe it's finding that online community or that local hotline. Maybe it's finding a therapist that is either low fee or takes your insurance. And I know therapy can be expensive and not everyone has those resources. But again, just do not keep these feelings trapped inside, because they'll be stored inside your body. They'll lead to mental health, physical health issues. So the biggest thing that I stress is your safety and making that a priority, and really knowing to make that a priority, because your life matters and your safety matters.
Thank you.
Wow.
So, you know, I think most of us, when we go to law school, you know, the first week that we're there, they talk to us all about the high rates of alcohol and substance abuse use disorders in the legal, you know, profession. Attorneys are generally said to face these challenges at twice the national average. These issues begin before you enter the profession and before you graduate law school. So what are some tips or resources, Jeena, that you may have or know of for law students who are battling, you know, first of all, fear of alcohol and substance abuse disorders, and then actually, you know, if they think they may be experiencing these, what are some suggestions that you have?
Yeah, and you know, you want to say like sort of a blanket statement, not only for alcohol and drug use, but also just for all the mental health issue, is that like all the self-care tips that we're talking about, it's not a substitute for therapy, right? I want to just emphasize so strongly that getting help for your mental well-being, it should be as important of a priority as going and seeing a doctor if you're experiencing some sort of physical illness. And one of my sort of biggest regret is that I didn't get help for my anxiety much earlier on. I sort of you know, struggled in secret. And I remember like having this sense of relief when the therapist said, oh, you have social anxiety disorder. And this is something that's very common and it's totally treatable. And I think that's the other important thing, is that a lot of these mental health issues are really treatable. And so, you know, if you're noticing that, and I think, you know, if you sort of tune in, there are these little like, I don't know, like voices or feelings that says, oh, you know, this, like something just isn't right, or it may not even just be like any specific thing. It's just like not really feeling like yourself, not enjoying the things that you used to. Maybe you're drinking a little more than you normally would. And so that's the first thing I would say, is really getting and seeking help, and also like deprioritizing events where alcohol is like the centerpiece. You know, I think, I don't know if this is still the case in law school, but I remember in law school there were like so many happy hours, and it's like, oh my gosh, we had a really hard week in school, let's go celebrate. Or, you know, oh, that mock trial, like that was super hard, let's go celebrate by drinking. And I think for many different reasons, people may not want to drink, right? Not only because they're struggling with some sort of substance issue. And so actually having events where alcohol is not the center actually helps to create a more inclusive environment. So like no happy hours, you know, like choose a different activity where that's the centerpiece.
And I have just a really quick follow-up to that. What if, you know, these aren't things that you're noticing about yourself, but perhaps a colleague in law school, and, you know, you're worried about them? You know, is it appropriate to address these things? And if so, how? What do you suggest for, you know, law students who are seeing their colleagues maybe battling these things?
Yeah, I think it is incredibly important to reach out, and reach out with the intention that you mean it, right? Like with care and love. You know, I think sort of the script that I follow is to, you know, just reach out to a person and say, you know, I'm noticing these changes or shifts in you. Is everything okay? You know, is there anything I can do to help? And really, I think the hardest part is just to listen, right? Not to try to fix, not to, like, as lawyers, like we tend to sort of love to go into fixing mode, but just to like allow that person to know that you are there for them, that you care about them, that, you know, you love them, and you have this like unconditional regard for them, and just to be like open, and just be available. But yeah, I mean, you know, don't be a silent partner in someone's struggle.
I just have a thought. I mean, I work more with sexual addictive behaviors, but just in terms of addiction and alcohol, I would wonder, why is it that you're turning towards alcohol? can you turn towards something else other than alcohol? What is this drive? What is this need to alcohol, to partying? Is there someone that you can turn to instead? Is there something you can turn to? And kind of sifting through that. Why are you turning towards this thing? So.
Great. So, Taylor, should we close out?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, any final words of encouragement, advice? You all have given so much. Thank you so much. But do you have any final words?
I'll share with you something that's kind of lasted through sort of my whole journey. And it's this idea that having your own mind be kind to itself is your birthright. And I just found that to be so powerful. And so just, noticing the voice in which you are talking to yourself. And if you're like, well, I don't know how I should talk to myself, listen to the way that you talk to someone that you love and make sure that you are at least extending that level of kindness and compassion towards yourself.
Love that. Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go through my biggest points is holding yourself accountable to that self-care, making the safety plans if needed. Again, always calling hotlines to help you through that. They can help you with safety planning, and just being kind and gentle with yourself, always.
Taylor, do you have any final words?
Well, I just would like to thank both of you for taking the time to do this. As a recent graduate of law school, I wish I could have had this in the beginning, but it's going to help a lot of law students. And thank you to everybody who is tuning in. And I hope that, you found something that, you can really take to heart and really, help you get through these 3 very, very long, but, in the end, I hope it will all be rewarding for all of you. And I can't wait to practice law next to all of you.
Yay! Taylor, thank you for creating this. And Jeena and Samantha, thank you so much for the gifts that you've given to everyone. And everyone who's listening, thank you for giving this to yourselves. I hope that this was helpful. We are going to share with you the websites for both Samantha and Jeena. And we also have some resources on lgbtbar.org. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me at drew@lgbtbar.org. So thank you all and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.